Manuel I Komnenos was a Byzantine emperor of the 12th century who reigned over a crucial turning point in the history of Byzantium and the Mediterranean. His reign saw the last flowering of the Komnenian restoration, during which the Byzantine Empire had seen a resurgence of its military and economic power, and had enjoyed a cultural revival. Eager to restore his empire to its past glories as the superpower of the Mediterranean world, Manuel pursued an energetic and ambitious foreign policy. In the process he made alliances with the Pope and the resurgent West. He invaded the Norman kingdom of Sicily, although unsuccessfully. The passage of the potentially dangerous Second Crusade was adroitly managed through his empire. Manuel established a Byzantine protectorate over the Crusader states of Outremer, facing Muslim advances in the Holy Land. He made common cause with the Kingdom of Jerusalem and participated in a combined invasion of Fatimid Egypt. Manuel reshaped the political maps of the Balkans and the eastern Mediterranean, placing the kingdoms of Hungary and Outremer under Byzantine hegemony and campaigning aggressively against his neighbors both in the west and in the east. However, towards the end of his reign, Manuel's achievements in the east were compromised by a serious defeat at Myriokephalon, which in large part resulted from his arrogance in attacking a well-defended Seljuk position. Although the Byzantines recovered and Manuel concluded an advantageous peace with Sultan Kilij Arslan II, Myriokephalon proved to be the final, unsuccessful effort by the empire to recover the interior of Anatolia from the Turks. Called Homegus by the Greeks, Manuel is known to have inspired intense loyalty in those who served him. He also appears as the hero of a history written by his secretary, John Komnenos, in which every virtue is attributed to him. Manuel, who was influenced by his contact with Western Crusaders, enjoyed the reputation of the most blessed emperor of Constantinople in parts of the Latin world as well. Modern historians, however, have been less enthusiastic about him. Some of them assert that the great power he wielded was not his own personal achievement, but that of the dynasty he represented. They also argue that, since Byzantine imperial power declined catastrophically after Manuel's death, it is only natural to look for the causes of this decline in his reign. Accession to the throne. Manuel Komnenos was the fourth son of John II Komnenos and Oscar of Hungary, so it seemed very unlikely that he would succeed his father. His maternal grandfather was Street Ladislaus. Having distinguished himself in his father's war against the Seljuk Turks in 1143, Manuel was chosen as his successor by John, in preference to his elder surviving brother Isaac. After John died on 8 April 1143, his son, Manuel, was acclaimed emperor by the armies, yet his succession was by no means assured. At his father's deathbed in the wilds of Cilicia far from Constantinople, he recognized that it was vital he should return to the capital as soon as possible. He still had to take care of his father's funeral, and tradition demanded he organize the foundation of a monastery on the spot where his father died. Swiftly, he dispatched the Megas Domesticos John Axouch ahead of him, with orders to arrest his most dangerous potential rival, his brother Isaac, who was living in the Great Palace with instant access to the imperial treasure and regalia. Axouch arrived in the capital even before news of the emperor's death had reached it. He quickly secured the loyalty of the city, and when Manuel entered the capital in August 1143, he was crowned by the new patriarch, Michael Korkoar. A few days later, with nothing more to fear as his position as emperor was now secure, Manuel ordered the release of Isaac. Then he ordered 2 golden pieces to be given to every householder in Constantinople and 200 pounds of gold to be given to the Byzantine Church. The empire that Manuel inherited from his father had undergone great changes since its foundation by Constantine, 8 centuries before. In the time of his predecessor Justinian I, parts of the former Western Roman Empire had been recovered, including Italy, Africa, and part of Spain. However, the empire had diminished greatly following this. The most obvious change had occurred in the 7th century. The soldiers of Islam had taken Egypt, Palestine, and much of Syria away from the empire irrevocably. They had then swept on westwards into what in the time of Constantine had been the western provinces of the Roman Empire, in North Africa and Spain. In the centuries since, the emperors had ruled over a realm that largely consisted of Asia Minor in the east, and the Balkans in the west. In the late 11th century, the Byzantine Empire entered a period of marked military and political decline, which had been arrested and largely reversed by the leadership of Manuel's grandfather and father. Yet the empire that Manuel inherited was a polity facing formidable challenges. At the end of the 11th century, the Normans of Sicily had removed Italy from the control of the Byzantine Emperor. The Seljuk Turks had done the same with central Anatolia, and in the Levant, a new force had appeared, the Crusader states, who presented the Byzantine Empire with new challenges. Now, more than at any time during the preceding centuries, the task facing the emperor was daunting indeed. Second Crusade and Reinald of Chatillon, Prince of Antioch. The first test of Manuel's reign came in 1144, when he was faced with a demand by Raymond, Prince of Antioch, for the cession of Cilician territories. However, later that year the Crusader county of Edessa was engulfed by the tide of a resurgent Islamic jihad under Ahmad ad-Din Artabagzengi. Raymond realized that immediate help from the west was out of the question. With his eastern flank now dangerously exposed to this new threat, there seemed little option but for him to prepare for a humiliating visit to Constantinople. Swallowing his pride, he made the journey north to ask for the protection of the emperor. After submitting to Manuel, he was promised the support that he had requested, and his allegiance to Byzantium was secured. Expedition against Konya. In 1146 Manuel assembled his army at the military base Lopadian and set out on a punitive expedition against Masud the Sultan of Rum, who had been repeatedly violating the frontiers of the empire in western Anatolia and Cilicia. There was no attempt at systematic conquest of territory, but Manuel's army defeated the Turks at Acronis, before capturing and destroying the fortified town of Philomelian, removing its remaining Christian population. The Byzantine forces reached Masud's capital, Konya, and ravaged the area around the city, but could not assault its walls. Among Manuel's motives for mounting this razzia there included a wish to be seen in the West as actively espousing the crusading ideal. Komnenos also attributed to Manuel a desire to show off his martial prowess to his new bride. While on this campaign, Manuel received a letter from Louis VII of France announcing his intention of leading an army to the relief of the Crusader states. Arrival of the Crusaders. Manuel was prevented from following up his early successes in the east. 4 events to the west meant that his presence was urgently required in the Balkans. In 1147 he granted a passage through his dominions to 2 armies of the Second Crusade under Conrad III of Germany and Louis VII of France. At this time, there were still members of the Byzantine court who remembered the passage of the First Crusade, a defining event in the collective memory of the age that had fascinated Manuel's aunt, Anna Komnena. Many Byzantines feared the Crusade, a view endorsed by the numerous acts of vandalism and theft practiced by the unruly armies as they marched through Byzantine territory. Byzantine troops followed the Crusaders, attempting to police the behavior, and further troops were assembled in Constantinople, ready to defend the capital against any acts of aggression. This cautious approach was well advised, but still the numerous incidents of covert and open hostility between the Franks and the Greeks on the line of march, for which it seems both sides were to blame, precipitated conflict between Manuel and his guests. Manuel took the precaution, which his grandfather had not taken, of making repairs to the city walls, and he pressed the two kings for guarantees concerning the security of his territories. Conrad's army was the first to enter the Byzantine territory in the summer of 1147, and it figures more prominently in the Byzantine sources, which imply that it was the more troublesome of the two. Indeed, the contemporary Byzantine historian Komnenos describes a full-scale clash between a Byzantine force and part of Conrad's army, outside the walls of Constantinople. The Byzantines defeated the Germans and, in Byzantine eyes, this reverse caused Conrad to agree to have his army speedily ferried across to Damales on the Asian shore of the Bosphorus. After 1147, however, the relations between the two leaders became friendlier. By 1148, Manuel had seen the wisdom of securing an alliance with Conrad, whose sister-in-law Bertha of Sulzbach he had earlier married. He actually persuaded the German king to renew their alliance against Roger II of Sicily. Unfortunately for the Byzantine Emperor, Conrad died in 1152, and despite repeated attempts, Manuel could not reach an agreement with his successor, Frederick I Barbarossa. Cyprus invaded. Manuel's attention was again drawn to Antioch in 1156, when Reinald of Chatillon, the new Prince of Antioch, claimed that the Byzantine Emperor had reneged on his promise to pay him a sum of money and vowed to attack the Byzantine province of Cyprus. Reinald arrested the governor of the island, John Komnenos, who was a nephew of Manuel, and the general Michael Branas. The Latin historian William of Tyre deplored this act of war against fellow Christians and described the atrocities committed by Reinald's men in considerable detail. Having ransacked the island and plundered all its wealth, Reinald's army mutilated the survivors before forcing them to buy back the flocks at exorbitant prices with what little they had left. Thus enriched with enough booty to make Antioch wealthy for years, the invaders boarded the ships and set sail for home. Reinald also sent some of the mutilated hostages to Constantinople as a vivid demonstration of his disobedience and his contempt for the Byzantine Emperor. Manuel responded to this outrage in a characteristically energetic way. In the winter of 1158–59, he marched to Cilicia at the head of a huge army. The speed of his advance was such that he managed to surprise the Armenian Thurus of Cilicia, who had participated in the attack on Cyprus. Thurus fled into the mountains, and Cilicia swiftly fell to Manuel. Manuel in Antioch. Meanwhile, news of the advance of the Byzantine army soon reached Antioch. Realizing that he had no hope of defeating Manuel, Reinald also knew that he could not expect any help from King Baldwin III of Jerusalem. Baldwin did not approve of Reinald's attack on Cyprus, and in any case had already made an agreement with Manuel. Thus isolated and abandoned by his allies, Reinald decided that abject submission was his only hope. He appeared before the emperor, dressed in a sack with a rope tied around his neck, and begged for forgiveness. Manuel at first ignored the prostrate Reinald. Chatting with his courtiers, William of Tyre commented that this ignominious scene continued for so long that all present were disgusted by it. Eventually, Manuel forgave Reinald on condition that he would become a vassal of the empire. effectively surrendering the independence of Antioch to Byzantium. Peace having been restored, a grand ceremonial procession was staged on the 12th of April 1159 for the triumphant entry of the Byzantine army into the city, with Manuel riding through the streets on horseback, while the Prince of Antioch and the King of Jerusalem followed on foot. Manuel dispensed justice to the citizens and presided over games and tournaments for the crowd. In May, at the head of a united Christian army, he started on the road to Edessa, but he abandoned the campaign when he secured the release by Nur ad-Din, the ruler of Syria, of 6,000 Christian prisoners captured in various battles since the Second Crusade. Despite the glorious end of the expedition, modern scholars argue that Manuel ultimately achieved much less than he had desired in terms of imperial restoration. Satisfied with his efforts thus far, Manuel headed back to Constantinople. On the way back, his troops were surprised in line of march by the Turks. Despite this, they won a complete victory, routing the enemy army from the field and inflicting heavy losses. In the following year, Manuel drove the Turks out of Isauria. Italian campaign. Roger II of Sicily. In 1147, Manuel was faced with war by Roger II of Sicily, whose fleet had captured the Byzantine island of Corfu and plundered Thebes and Corinth. However, despite being distracted by a Cuman attack in the Balkans, in 1148 Manuel enlisted the alliance of Conrad III of Germany, and the help of the Venetians, who quickly defeated Roger with the powerful fleet. In 1149, Manuel recovered Corfu and prepared to take the offensive against the Normans, while Roger II sent George of Antioch with a fleet of 40 ships to pillage Constantinople's suburbs. Manuel had already agreed with Conrad on a joint invasion and partition of southern Italy and Sicily. The renewal of the German alliance remained the principal orientation of Manuel's foreign policy for the rest of his reign. Despite the gradual divergence of interests between the two empires after Conrad's death, Roger died in February 1154 and was succeeded by William I, who faced widespread rebellions against his rule in Sicily and Apulia, leading to the presence of Apulian refugees at the Byzantine court. Conrad's successor, Frederick Barbarossa, launched a campaign against the Normans, but his expedition stalled. These developments encouraged Manuel to take advantage of the multiple instabilities on the Italian peninsula. He sent Michael Palaiologos and John Ducas Carmatiras, both of whom held the high imperial rank of Sebastus, with Byzantine troops, 10 ships, and large quantities of gold to invade Apulia in 1155. The two generals were instructed to enlist the support of Frederick, but he declined because his demoralized army longed to get back north of the Alps as soon as possible. Nevertheless, with the help of disaffected local barons, including Count Robert of Loritello, Manuel's expedition achieved astonishingly rapid progress as the whole of southern Italy rose up in rebellion against the Sicilian crown and the untried William I. Followed a string of spectacular successes as numerous strongholds yielded either to force of the lure of gold, papal Byzantine alliance. The city of Bari, which had been the capital of the Byzantine Catapanate of southern Italy for centuries before the arrival of the Normans, opened its gates to the emperor's army, and the overjoyed citizens tore down the Norman citadel. After the fall of Bari, the cities of Trani, Giovinazzo, Andria, Taranto, and Brindisi were also captured. William arrived with his army, including 2,000 knights, but was heavily defeated. Encouraged by the success, Manuel dreamed of restoration of the Roman Empire, at cost of union between the Orthodox and the Catholic Church, a prospect which would frequently be offered to the Pope during negotiations and plans for alliance. If there was ever a chance of reuniting the Eastern and Western churches, and coming to reconciliation reconciliation with the Pope permanently. This was probably the most favorable moment. The papacy was never on good terms with the Normans, except when under duress by the threat of direct military action. Having the civilized Eastern Roman Empire on its southern border was infinitely preferable to the papacy than having to constantly deal with the troublesome Normans of Sicily. It was in the interest of Pope Hadrian IV to reach a deal if at all possible, since doing so would greatly increase his own influence over the entire Orthodox Christian population. Manuel offered a large sum of money to the Pope for the provision of troops, with the request that the Pope grant the Byzantine Emperor lordship of 3 maritime cities in return for assistance in expelling William from Sicily. Manuel also promised to pay £5,000 of gold to the Pope and the Curia. Negotiations were hurriedly carried out, and an alliance was formed between Manuel and Hadrian. At this point, just as the war seemed decided in his favor, events turned against Manuel. Byzantine commander Michael Palaiologos alienated allies with his attitude, stalling the campaign as Count Robert III of Loritello refused to speak to him. Although the two were reconciled, the campaign had lost some of its momentum. Michael was soon recalled to Constantinople, and his loss was a major blow to the campaign. The turning point was the Battle for Brindisi, where the Sicilians launched a major counterattack by both land and sea. At the approach of the enemy, the mercenaries that had been hired with Manuel's gold demanded huge increases in the pay. When this was refused, they deserted. Even the local barons started to melt away, and soon John Ducas was left hopelessly outnumbered. The arrival of Alexios Komnenos Bryennios with some ships failed to retrieve the Byzantine position. The naval battle was decided in favor of the Sicilians, while John Ducas and Alexios Bryennios were captured. Manuel then sent Alexios Axouch to Ancona to raise another army, but by this time William had already retaken all of the Byzantine conquests in Apulia. The defeat at Brindisi put an end to the restored Byzantine reign in Italy. In 1158 the Byzantine army left Italy and never returned again. Both Nicetas Choniates and Kinomos, the major Byzantine historians of this period, agree, however, that the peace terms Axouch secured from William allowed Manuel to extricate himself from the war with dignity. Despite a devastating raid by a Sicilian fleet of 164 ships on Euboea and Almira in 1156, failure of the church union during the Italian campaign, and afterwards, during the struggle of the papal curia with Frederick, Manuel tried to seduce the popes with hints of a possible union between the Eastern and Western churches. Although in 1155 Pope Hadrian had expressed his eagerness to prompt the reunion of the churches, hopes for a lasting papal-Byzantine alliance came up against insuperable problems. Pope Hadrian IV and his successors demanded recognition of the religious authority over all Christians everywhere and sought superiority over the Byzantine Emperor. They were not at all willing to fall into a state of dependence from one emperor to the other. Manuel, on the other hand, wanted an official recognition of his secular authority over both East and West. Such conditions would not be accepted by either side. Even if a pro-Western emperor such as Manuel agreed, the Greek citizens of the empire would have rejected outright any union of this sort, as they did almost 300 years later when the Orthodox and Catholic churches were briefly united under the Pope. In spite of his friendliness towards the Roman Church and his cordial relations with all the popes, Manuel was never honored with the title of Augustus by the popes, and although he twice sent embassies to Pope Alexander III offering to reunite the Greek and Latin churches, the Pope refused, under pretext of the troubles that would follow union. Ultimately, a deal proved elusive, and the two churches have remained divided. The final results of the Italian campaign were limited in terms of the advantages gained by the empire. The city of Ancona became a Byzantine base in Italy, accepting the emperor as sovereign. The Normans of Sicily had been damaged and now came to terms with the empire, ensuring peace for the rest of Manuel's reign. The empire's ability to get involved in Italian affairs had been demonstrated. However, given the enormous quantities of gold which had been lavished on the project, it also demonstrated the limits of what money and diplomacy alone could achieve. The expensive Manuel's involvement in Italy must have cost the treasury a great deal, and yet it produced only limited solid gains. Byzantine policy in Italy after 1158. Under the new conditions, the aims of the Byzantine policy changed. Manuel now decided to oppose the objective of the Hohenstaufen dynasty to directly annex Italy, which Frederick believed should acknowledge his power. When the war between Frederick I Barbarossa and the northern Italian communes started, Manuel actively supported the Lombard League with money, subsidies, agents, and occasionally troops. The walls of Milan, demolished by the Germans, were restored with the aid of the Byzantine Emperor. Frederick's defeat at the Battle of Legnano on the 29th of May 1176 seemed rather to improve Manuel's position in Italy. According to Kinemost, Cremona, Pavia, and a number of other Ligurian cities went over to Manuel. His relations were also particularly favorable in regard to Genoa and Pisa, but not to Venice. In March 1171, Manuel had suddenly broken with Venice, ordering all 20,000 Venetians on imperial territory to be arrested and the property confiscated. Venice, incensed, sent a fleet of 120 ships against Byzantium. Due to an epidemic, and pursued by 150 Byzantine ships, the fleet was forced to return without great success. In all probability, friendly relations between Byzantium and Venice were not restored in Manuel's lifetime. Balkan Frontier. On his northern frontier, Manuel expended considerable effort to preserve the conquests made by Basil II over 100 years earlier and maintained, sometimes tenuously, ever since. Due to distraction from his neighbors on the Balkan frontier, Manuel was kept from his main objective, the subjugation of the Normans of Sicily. Relations had been good with the Serbs and Hungarians since 1129, so the Serb rebellion came as a shock. The Serbs of Raška, being so induced by Roger II of Sicily, invaded Byzantine territory in 1149. Manuel forced the rebellious Serbs, and the leader, Euros II, to vassalage. He then made repeated attacks upon the Hungarians with a view to annexing the territory along the Sava. In the wars of 1151 to 1153 and 1163 to 1168, Manuel led his troops into Hungary, and a spectacular raid deep into enemy territory yielded substantial war booty. In 1167, Manuel sent 15,000 men under the command of Andronicos Kontostephanes against the Hungarians, scoring a decisive victory at the Battle of Sirmium and enabling the empire to conclude a very advantageous peace with the Hungarian kingdom, by which Samir, Bosnia, and Dalmatia were ceded. By 1168, nearly the whole of the eastern Adriatic coast lay in Manuel's hands. Efforts were also made towards the diplomatic annexation of Hungary. The Hungarian heir Bekeutele, younger brother of the Hungarian king Stephen III, was sent to Constantinople to be educated in the emperor's court. Manuel intended the youth to marry his daughter, Maria, and to make him his heir, thus securing the union of Hungary with the empire. At court, Byzantine assumed the name Alexius and received the title of despot, which had previously been applied only to the emperor himself. However, two unforeseen dynastic events drastically altered the situation. In 1169, Manuel's young wife gave birth to a son, thus depriving Byzantine of his status as heir of the Byzantine throne. Then, in 1172, Stephen died childless, and Byzantine went home to take his throne. Before leaving Constantinople, he swore a solemn oath to Manuel that he would always keep in mind the interests of the emperor and of the Romans. Byzantine III kept his word. As long as Manuel lived, he made no attempt to retrieve his Croatian inheritance, which he only afterwards reincorporated into Hungary.